Well, I've spent almost 2 decades helping beekeepers learn more about honeybees, and I know some of you tell me that it can be a struggle at times going from a beginner to developing the skills necessary to really become a good beekeeper. Today, I want to give you a magic key that will help you unlock the mysteries of how do some people really become very good beekeepers and others continue to struggle to understand and raise good bees. Hello, everybody. David Burns. Good to be with you today. Hope your day is going good. I believe after spending 2 decades teaching beekeepers and working with a lot of you in my Bee Team 6 mentorship program, I believe that there's a lot of beekeepers that get locked into the beginner phase of beekeeping. I call this the descriptive stage. It's a stage in beekeeping where you learn to describe things. Like maybe you take a class and they teach you in a class how to describe, how to identify things. Oh, there are eggs there. I see capped over brood. I see honey. I see nectar. You're a descriptive beekeeper. You can describe what you're seeing. And that's the very first good thing that we need to do as a beekeeper is describe things. But sometimes beekeepers get stuck in the descriptive stage. And even if you're just starting out, realize that you will go through a descriptive phase, a stage when you will learn to identify things and you'll feel good about that. But here's the deal. After you've been doing this, maybe after your first year or even into your first year, please understand you need to transition from the descriptive stage over to the interpretive stage. That's the stage where you not only identify what you're seeing, but you diagnose what you're seeing. You know how to analyze it. So instead of saying, I see eggs, you evaluate the eggs. You evaluate the number of eggs you see, and that tells you, do I have a good laying queen or not? Do I see the eggs that I need to see? By population of eggs, the amount of eggs that you see determines what the future holds for your colony. We'll get into that in just a minute. So instead of saying, I see brood, maybe capped over brood, the interpretive beekeeper says, I see capped over brood, and what I need to do is analyze whether my hive is accelerating in growth or are they stalling and lagging behind. There's a big difference there. So a lot of beginners can identify capped over brood and they feel good about it, but even with capped over brood, your hive can be failing and you don't even know it. A descriptive beekeeper says, oh, good, I see resources. I see a frame of nectar, frame of honey. I see some pollen. Good, maybe some bee bread. But a interpretive beekeeper says, is this nutrition that I'm seeing actually driving and supporting growth, or is it restricting my growth? Isn't that amazing? So stay with me in this video because I'm going to kind of break this down for you. And this is going to be exciting because I know some of you feel very stalled out in understanding beekeeping. You're like, I don't know, I took a class, I know what eggs look like. I mean, I don't see eggs all the time, you might say, but I know what they look like. I know what brood looks like. I know how to, identify things, but how do I really give a good analytical diagnosis of what I'm seeing? That's what we're going to jump into today. So let me first start by saying that in the beehive, all honeybee colonies have patterns and rhythms. And once we can develop an eye to understand and see these rhythms and patterns, the more it's going to help us to diagnose and evaluate when we do a hive inspection. That's the neat thing about honeybees. They are the most studied insect, and that's because they have predictable patterns. And let's talk about the first predictable pattern is the predictable pattern of the brood pattern. For example, if you see capped over brood, capped over pupae in your hive, that means you will have adult bees in about 12 days, just short of 2 weeks. Now, this is important to understand. Follow me, okay? So let's say you see capped over brood. You're like, oh good, I got capped over brood. And by the way, this is what it looks like. Then you know that in a couple of weeks, just shy of a couple of weeks, you're gonna have a lot of adult bees. And if you know the labor process of what the kind of the way bees go through their division of labor, then you can identify what's going to happen in the next few weeks after they emerge. So capped over brood today means adult bees in a couple of weeks, and it actually means foragers in 3 weeks. So if you just stop and think about that, when I pull up a frame of capped over brood, I say, okay, good brood pattern. I also say, ooh, there's 3,500 cells on one side of a deep frame, 35 on the other. That's about 5,000 to 7,000 new bees I'm going to get on one frame alone. And if I have 4 capped over brood, that means that I am going to get 20,000 bees, 2 packages in just 12 days as adult bees. That means I've got 20,000 bees coming into my foraging force in 3 weeks, which means, oh good, I need to put some supers on because in 3 weeks I'm going to have 20,000 foragers. But something else clicks in my mind as an experienced beekeeper, because I know that before the foragers forage, they're going to be wax developers. They have 8 wax glands underneath their abdomen, and they're going to be making wax on day 12 through day 17. So I know that before, like after they emerge, around 2 weeks after they emerge, they're going to be wax builders. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how do I get a lot of you struggle with this. You say, I can't get my honey supers drawn out. They won't build wax around my foundation to draw out my super foundation so I can get them filled up with nectar and honey. So in my mind, I'm thinking that's always a deficit of 12 to 17 day old bees in the population. They're not there to make that wax. They're not there to pull that comb out. So it's not that all the bees are there and they're not sitting around going, you know, David really wants us to make all that wax pulled out, but we kind of don't want to today because we're lazy and we don't want to. They're not saying that at all. They're not in existence, or they're very low in number. So a lot of times beekeepers that are beginners, they don't see that coming down the pike. So if you have spotty brood or a low amount of brood and you're saying, oh good, I see some brood doesn't mean a lot of brood, right? And so you don't have a huge wax building force in 2 weeks that are going to be your foragers in 3 weeks. So look at it like these bees emerge and they essentially build their own comb so that when they get a week older, they can fly out, gather nectar, and put it in the comb that they just built. So this is what I'm talking about, interpreting what you're seeing. Now, this is true in predictable growth patterns of honeybees as well. So let's just start with late winter, when kind of the bee season is of interest to beekeepers coming out of winter, late winter. This is when the bees start building up. Production is ramping up in late winter. And that's why it's so important to realize bees starve out in this time because they're ramping up production. There's not really a lot of nectar out there yet, but the days are getting longer. The bees are getting itchy to get going in late winter. And so what happens is, due to low nutrition, they want to ramp up, they can't, but they do ramp up, but the nutrition isn't there to support what they're ramping up. A cold snap comes and the hives die in January or February. This is real common to lose your hives in late winter. And this is a pattern. It's a rhythm that we know. And all we have to do to overcome the negative side of that event is to feed your bees in late winter. Feed them sugar water. If it's warm enough, 50 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, they'll take that sugar water, feed them a candy board, get them built up, support them, support what they're doing, support what they want to do. They want to grow in late winter. That's what they're wired to do. That's their pattern. So if they can't do it from low nutrition, you come along side of them as a beekeeper, support them in late winter. Now in early spring, and the next part of the growth season is that the bees start growing up. They grow really fast right now. And usually we don't have to do anything, thank goodness, because this is when all the flowers bloom, the fruit trees bloom, dandelions pop. There's so much out there, pollen, nectar, that we don't have to really do anything. So we have that spring population explosion. And then mid-spring is something that really plagues beekeepers. Do you know what happens in mid-spring? What happens? You tell me. What is it? We all worry about it. We don't know what to do when it happens. You know what it is? It's the pressure of swarming. That's right. Bees want to reproduce, make another colony, split off. Half go off with the older queen, and they make a new colony, leaving behind some virgin cells, new queens, and half of the colony. So Mid-spring is swarm pressure season. Summer, everything stabilizes. Our population is kind of running at its maximum, 40 to 60,000 bees. It's kind of stabilized its growth. It's just replacing growth now. They're doing their thing in summer. And then in fall, it's a reduction in growth. And they begin to kind of start storing up resources for winter because winter's coming. So before there's a dearth, they start storing up resources. They kind of back down. You might see your queen not laying as much in the fall. And then finally, we have winter when all the bees start clustering and they conserve everything they have. They're trying not to burn through all their food, but sometimes you can get a warm up in the wintertime and they do get active and start eating through their food. So that's kind of the cycle, the pattern that we know that bees go through in the season. And if we know these things, we can come alongside and help our bees in these seasons. I've got 3 more patterns to tell you about that's going to help you go from a descriptive beekeeper to an interpretive beekeeper. Before I do, let me tell you one more way that you can improve your beekeeping skills, and that's by taking my online beekeeping courses. I've got them at 50% off during Black Friday weekend, November 27th through December the 30th. That's coming up tomorrow, if you're watching this on the day it's published. But if you're watching it this weekend and all, get a hold of these classes. You've seen me on YouTube. I think you know my personality. If you'd like to take a beekeeping course with me, it's different than my YouTube videos. Some of you think I just took my YouTube videos and put them together. No, this is me teaching lectures. This is me in these videos teaching you in the hive, showing you examples. I have sold these to thousands of beekeepers who have really enjoyed them. Check it out. Here's the link right here. It's going to help you have a very descriptive way of getting into beekeeping, staying in beekeeping, and learning. And I'd love to be your mentor. So check that out. Here's the link, 50% off. Now let's get back to these last 3 ways that we can understand the patterns of bees and become an interpretive beekeeper. I mentioned bees having a comb building pattern, and that's true. They build comb when there's a nectar flow. Now, as a descriptive beekeeper, you may describe, oh, look, they're drawing comb out. But as a more interpretive beekeeper, it clicks in your mind to say, oh, wow, there's a big honey flow right now in the spring, and that's when I'm going to get the majority of my honey supers drawn out. I'm going to put my honey supers on during the most heaviest nectar flow there is, because in a heavy nectar flow, they're going to draw out my supers. I'm not going to wait till midsummer when the nectar flow is waning a little bit, or fall, to try to get my supers drawn out. I'm going to have my supers purchased and ready to put in my hive the first time I see a heavy nectar flow in the spring. And again, it takes those young bees, 12 to 17 days old, so a good laying queen with a good brood pattern producing the populations of worker bees that when they get to be 12, 17 years old, they can make this wax and then they can become foragers. Then there's the communication and movement patterns, the rhythm and patterns of communication and movements. One of them is one that you're all familiar with probably, is a waggle dance. This is the bee's major way of communicating where all the good stuff is out there. A forager scout bee will go out there, find this Goldilocks field of wonderful flowers and nectar, and she'll load up on it, bring it back in excitement to the colony, and she'll perform a waggle dance. This waggle dance describes the location, how far it is, how to get to it, and all the bees watch her memorize where she's telling them to go, and they all go get it. She'll even give them samples of the nectar from the flowers out there so they can taste the sweet nectar that she brought back. And it gets them all excited. They go crazy. They all go get the nectar in this field. So that is a pattern that we can all look at, we know, and this is how bees work in communicating. Another pheromone that is part of this communication is one that you're all too familiar with and you wish you weren't, and that is the alarm pheromone. Alarm pheromone is on the outside of the sting venom sac, and it actually, when you get stung, that venom sac spreads that alarm pheromone. This triggers the other bees to come to the aid of that bee and sting more. And so this is the way bees communicate. This is something that's predictable. We know what happens. That's why when I get stung, I blow a little puff of smoke on it to try to mask that alarm pheromone. A round dance, different than the waggle dance, is when the bees find some nectar really close to their hive And rather than give them the other bees a descriptive way to get there, they just kind of twirl in a round direction, basically saying, it's very close, just go out there, you'll find it. The other pheromone that you may probably be aware of, two more that I'll tell you about, this communication rhythm. One of them is the queen's mandibular pheromone, QMP. And this is a pheromone that kind of glues the hive together. They take on this odor of knowing their queen, their hive, and it kind of organizes the bees to work around this particular queen. The other pheromone is one that you're familiar with. It's a nasonol pheromone located in the back part of the abdomen. You can kind of see it open up sometimes when you get a new swarm and you're trying to get them to go in one box. You'll see a lot of bees with their rear of their abdomen stuck in the air, and they're just spraying out this nasonol pheromone to direct all the bees back into their house and their new home and let everybody know, hey, this is where we all live now. They'll use this nasonol pheromone even if you smoke them too much and the bees kind of get flighty. You'll see them directing the bees back home even though your smoke kind of is confusing them. Colony nutrition patterns. So we can develop an interpretive ability to add to our experience by knowing the colony's nutritional patterns that they have. Think of it this way. It's pretty common sense. Brood is fed first. They want the future to be solid, so they always feed their brood first. While the brood is expanding, it drives the colony, the foragers, to bring in more pollen. It takes a lot of pollen protein to help feed and developing brood to mature properly. So when the brood is developing, the foragers are driven out by instinct to bring in more pollen. So if you see a lot of pollen coming in and you see it being packed in your hives, then you know they're ramping up brood production. And of course, nectar is stored aggressively during a heavy nectar flow, and you'll see that. Nectar is brought in, it's dried down, it turns into honey. So they're bringing a lot of nectar in during a heavy nectar flow, and that's when your supers should be on. And of course, in the winter time, this is, believe it or not, it's a time when winter stores of honey are very much consumed, especially on not so cold winter days. When bees can move around, they're not so tightly clustered. These bees will actually just start consuming a lot of their stored honey. And that's why bees starve out. A lot of you probably have wrestled with your bees starving in January, February, or March. That's because they're ramping up production, brood production, and they're starting to consume all that stored honey that you may have thought was enough, but it probably wasn't. So I want you to wrap your mind around this concept of descriptive beekeeper. Everybody goes through that in the early days of beekeeping, but then you graduate, you advance through your beekeeping skills and experience into more interpretive beekeeping. So instead of identifying these patterns and seeing them, you're using these patterns that I just described to you to know what your bees are doing now. So think of it this way too. It's not only what your bees are doing now, but by looking at these patterns, you can look back into the past, right? So if you see capped over pupae, you know you can look back in the past and say, I had larvae last week, a little bit more, but last week. I had eggs a couple of weeks before that. The queen was laying. And then you can look at the present by saying, I see the presence of eggs, larvae, pupae, adult bees. That's a present moment. You can look at your hive and say, this is what I have right now. But here's where you go from a descriptive beekeeper to an interpretive beekeeper. When you look at the present, now an interpretive beekeeper, get this, looks into the future. Isn't that neat? In your hive, you can see the past, present, and future. Yeah, it's so phenomenal. So when I look at the present of my hive, I do an inspection. I'm looking for eggs, larvae, pupae, stored resources. I'm just gathering a full picture of the colony, and that tells me of the future. How many of these bees will be foragers in the future? How much brood do I have that's going to produce more bees in my future? How many eggs do I have? And so I just look into the future using all of this that's right there in front of me, telling me my future. Is it spotty brood? My future doesn't look good, okay? For example. So these things help someone who's wanting to advance to be a better beekeeper go from descriptive to interpretive. I love being in a hive, handling the frames, and I've spent 3 decades doing it. And I want to share with you guys some of the ways that you can really improve the ways that you handle your frames. And in my last video, I used an example right here of techniques of using frames like this, how you manipulate them in the hive for better hive inspections. Check that video out. It's right over here. See you guys over there.